Welcome to Inside Water, the audio partner to the visual world of the water and wastewater industry. From what's happening underground with pipes and pumps to the digital transformation reshaping utilities, this is where the industry's biggest challenges, innovations and ideas come together. My name is Chris Edwards and I'll be guiding you through all the twists and turns of the water industry in Australia and beyond. Today, I'll be joined by Dr. Georgina Davis, the Chief Executive Officer of the Queensland Water Directorate. The Directorate is the central advisory and advocacy body for Queensland's urban water industry. It's a collaborative hub that works with its members to provide safe, secure and sustainable urban water services to Queensland communities. Dr. Davis, you've come into the industry from a range of different sectors, including waste, agriculture and infrastructure. What drew you into the water industry and what have you learnt as a result?
I think the water industry is a fabulous sector to work in. It's at the forefront of everything from keeping our communities safe to managing our environment. In terms of, what I've learnt from the agricultural sector, obviously here in Queensland, agriculture is the lifeblood of regional communities, as is access to clean, safe drinking water and sanitation. The ag sector really taught me that effective government collaboration must be a bottom-up, it's got to be a place-based approach, and it's got to be co-designed. And we're seeing less and less of that from governments that are really sort of going to that top-down top-down practice. True progress, in my view, only happens when policymakers actively partner with communities and local leaders on the ground. Here in Queensland, our communities are so unique that we absolutely need that place-based solution over the one-size-fits-all approach. And that's something really that agriculture pushes very hard. Our regional landscapes here in Queensland vary from the dry outback to the coastal tropics. And these differences impact how you deliver services, particularly in water, because the climate and the climate impacts are so very different. So we all need very much a tailored governance approach. And also our regions here in Queensland manage also multiple industries. We have agriculture, we've got mining, we've got a big drive for critical minerals, green hydrogen interests and renewable energies. All of these sectors require water, sometimes in very significant volumes. As we are also experiencing longer droughts and more severe weather. So water management and access to water for our communities is just so critical and becoming more critical.
I want to dive into that point you raised about the diverse landscapes, because Queensland Water has a diverse membership from the smallest of councils to the largest of water utilities. Can you speak a bit about who your members are and how that collaboration together works?
Yes, absolutely. So our largest member here in Southeast Queensland has upward of 670,000 connections. And then some of our small water schemes can have anything from around 50 to 142 connections. Yet they are regulated exactly the same. They require exactly the same skills and have exactly the same levels of governance. And this comes at considerable cost and sometimes risk, in particular to our small communities that have a really small ratepayer base. The other thing is that urban water services in regional and remote Queensland have not been appropriately funded since 2009, when we had something called the SCAP, which was the Small Councils Assistance Programme, which provided ongoing state government funding upwards of around 80 to 100% to support our very smallest communities. And we had the WASP full of acronyms, which was the Water and Sewage Programme, which really was there to help our medium and larger councils. And that was, provided or offered a co-contribution of around 40 to 50% for essential critical water infrastructures. So, I find it very surprising when I came into the water sector, was the fact that, in fact, surprise probably isn't the word, it's disappointed that our smallest communities in Queensland, are really struggling with funding. They basically, as I said, it stopped since 2009. And we also have communities here in Queensland that basically don't have safe access to safe drinking water and sanitation. So we're not even meeting our obligations under Sustainable Development Goal 6. Yet we're supposed to be a developed country, and certainly here in SEQ, our standard of living is fantastic, but that's not reflected in water delivery across our state.
Absolutely. One of the things that I've noticed with Queensland Water is its commitment to collaboration across regions of, let's say, somewhat similar ecosystems or population groups. Can you talk a bit about how Queensland Water worked with its members to develop that relationship and what it means for councils and water utilities across the state?
Absolutely. So one of our probably, I would say, most successful programs that we are fortunate to partner with is something called QRAP, which is the Queensland Water Regional Alliance Programme. Now, the QRAP programme is basically based on a tripartite agreement. It's funded here in Queensland through the state government by the Department of Local Government, Water and Volunteers. We at Queensland Water are the technical project delivery support aspect of that programme. And then we partner with Local Government Association of Queensland, who are the third partner, who do a lot of the administration, manage the funding. And essentially that programme, as you said, there's 9 QRAP regions at the moment across Queensland. That encompasses, I think, 57 councils currently. So they're councils outside SEQ, and the reason for that is there is I suppose, an understanding or at least an assumption that councils and providers within SEQ have a ratepayer base or a billing base to sort of take care of themselves, but everything outside SEQ, because of our regional and remote areas, we need help. So essentially those regional alliances are very much based on geographical areas. They typically compose of 5 to 6 councils. And these alliances have been formed to tackle challenges of remoteness and size. So the alliances allow councils to essentially share knowledge and resources. They enhance their ability to work collaboratively. Every region has a coordinator that is funded by state to help coordinate meetings, to bring together funding applications for key works. And you technically in each area, you usually have a technical group, and those are your utility managers, they're your technical experts, your lead operators who are really on the ground, who know what the issues are. They collaborate, and when they find a problem that is shared across all of the regions or a couple of the regions, they're in a ability to then make a funding application to try and address that issue. And then you have a more strategic, higher level group within each QRAP region. And those are typically, your councillors, your CEOs, those people who have those sort of more strategic authority. And as I said, together they identify and prioritise water and sewage projects. And this could include anything from workforce attraction and training. The regions originally really sort of, I would say, thrived on joint procurement. The one challenge we have here in regional Queensland is you pay a Brisbane tax for your services. So if you want to have your sewers relined, you want to have your reservoirs cleaned, your lagoons desludged, all of those sorts of things, rather than an individual council saying, look, we've got this service, we've got this procurement process, we've got 1 or 2 reservoirs to clean, can we find someone? And then they pay the Brisbane tax. Now we've got a region of, say, 5 or 6 councils that go out for joint procurement, and they may have 30 reservoirs, they may have 8 lagoons to be sludged, and those sorts of things. So, I suppose the fundamental premise of those QRAP regions was to help with that scalability, to help with that joint procurement. But certainly those QRAP regions now have really entered a new phase of maturity. The projects that they're looking at are very sophisticated. To give sort of some examples here you've got FNQ Rock that's looking at water capability. And that project, is essentially looking at a practical roadmap to actually address capability challenges and support service outcomes. They've looked at the key gaps across all of their water services. They've looked at how they can become more scalable. And a central theme, as I said, with all of these regions is that regional collaboration. So in far north, as I said, they're looking at how they can share data, how they can align systems and processes, how they can leverage collective expertise. And that's about, the member councils building stronger, more resilient water services, why they can maximise the value of investment into the region. And then we've got a very different project, sort of northwest. I know has looked at desludging because a lot of our sewage or wastewater services there do use lagoons. So that was about joint procurement, but it was also about doing a joint assessment, to actually getting one specialist out to have a look at all the lagoons, to have a look at their integrity, to look at the sludge depths, what would be appropriate desludging methods and suitable disposal options for that sludge. And that really helped them, it reduced the risk of scope variations, project delays, cost overruns, particularly if each region's dealing with a different consultant or a different contractor. That joint procurement also, really helps. And then sort of most recently, the one project that really sort of sticks in my mind was one of our central Queensland QRAP regions that looked at a combined sustainability project. Because, we've got 69 councils in Queensland that deliver urban water services, so clean drinking water, wastewater services. Outside, 3 of those are in SEQ, and then all the rest are regional and remote. They have huge areas, they have very low ratepayer base. We also know that local councils in general are struggling with their financial sustainability. Here in Queensland, we expect them to be all things to all people. They have to provide here in Queensland not just water, but waste, roads, swimming pools, libraries, and everything in between. So we expect a lot from them, but they are very poorly funded. And the project in central Queensland QRAP region basically was it was a comprehensive strategic assessment of the region's water and wastewater services. It looked at workforce capability, asset management, things like the long-term financial sustainability, which I was just talking to. And really, it identified some really strong opportunities for collaboration, for sharing sort of backdoor type services. It looked at establishing very consistent data sets, shared methodology for asset assessments. It looked at ways of enhancing regional planning. and strengthening collective understanding of water security, because water security is another issue that Queensland really is very much, front and centre of the minds of our water service providers. And, from that, it looked at how it could strengthen things like water or drinking water quality, asset condition in general, given we've all got ageing assets. And importantly, it provided the strong evidence base that can then inform investment and prioritisation of investment going forward. And one of the things the regions always tell me is that it's stronger for them to hunt in a pack than try to go things alone. And yes, it's a very strong ethos for our regional, particularly our mayors and our CEOs, that if we try and seek investment or funding, as one council, we don't have that collaborative push that a group of 5 or 6 mayors can really exert onto state government.
I want to dive into that point you made about, for want of a better term, the Brisbane tax of working alone versus working as a group of councils. I'm curious to know, how has the broader water industry responded to having groups of councils approach them or tender out to achieve their goals?
I think it's beneficial even for our contractors. It gives them certainty. It gives them a pipeline of work, which is one of the things that we really struggle with in regional Queensland. I've actually had some of our tier 2 and tier 3 construction companies and builders here in the office and said, look, what would you need from us to have a regional office? What would you need from us to actually have, your staff actually deployed living in community? And they always tell me, one-off sugar hits of big jobs, actually, they struggle to deliver them for a variety of reasons. So really what they want to see from a contractor, consultant, builder type point of view is a pipeline of reasonably sized projects over a period of time. And, they always tell me the sweet spots around, 3 years, possibly 3+2 type contracting. And to have sort of, particularly in our more remote communities, sort of $1.2 to $1.7 million a year, so that they can have that crew on the ground. They do know that they can commit, to a local office for 3, maybe 5 years. The problem we have in Queensland at the moment, and as I said, we lost our ongoing stable funding back in 2009, is since 2009, the money that has gone to the urban water sector has been through grants. These grants are typically competitive, which is great if you're one of the larger councils. And actually, to respond to this, some of the larger councils now have professional grant writers within council, because it's become incredibly competitive. And if you want to secure funding, even as a big council, you need to put in a good quality bid. The problem is, if you are regional and remote, is you're struggling every day just to keep the water on, just to keep the assets running. You're probably not even aware that the grant has opened, let alone having the expertise or just the hours in the day to make a submission. And when, and a lot of the grants, because they are competitive and because of the nature of them, do rely on you having a strong body of evidence in consultancy reports to put a grant application in. Now, the QRAP program, to some extent, has tried to build that evidence base for our regions, but they are still really struggling with competing in this grant roulette process that we have. So I think there is a wide appreciation at all levels of government that this Russian roulette of competitive grants is not working. We're not building and addressing the water risks that we have right now, particularly here in Queensland. And we need to move to a better model. And as I said, that's very much being pushed as well by the construction sector, by the consultants who would much rather that we were, having that pipeline of projects. And the other thing about the pipeline of projects is that we can then actually start addressing those issues that are the riskiest. What very often happens when you get a grant, a call for grant submissions, is you can't actually put in a project that's already in your planned works. So you're looking for something new and creative, which you may get funding for, but actually doesn't address your most highest risk within delivering that urban water service. So very keen to move away from the grant system that we have.
You also spoke about having that pipeline of work and having people on the ground. And we all know that, workforce shortages and skill shortages are not just affecting, the water industry, they're affecting everybody. So how do you see Queensland Water working with the QRAP groups as well as the consultancies and other organisations to, I suppose, upskill local people and train them so companies do have that workforce on the ground in the regions?
Yeah. It's a good question, because we know in some of our regions, it's not unusual to have an ongoing 15-20% vacancy rate for some of our most critical workers, particularly water operators, in the water, the wastewater, and also in our networks. So recruitment in regional areas and remote areas is already difficult. In Queensland Water, we provide online training opportunities. There is a program that sits within QRAP called the Water Industry Worker that helps consolidate cohorts of people wanting to do training in the National Water Package, which is our training package for the urban water sector here in Australia. One of the things that you struggle with if you're a small council is you may only have actually 3 workers or 2 workers in the whole of the water department, and I use the word department very loosely. So to get them training, no training organisation is going to come out to whoop and beyond for 2 workers. The RTOs, are telling us essentially that they want minimum cohort numbers of 8, 12, 15. So what the Water Industry Worker does, which is a QRAP initiative funded through QRAP, is it looks at the QRAP regions and says, well, if you're Council A and you've got 1 worker, Council B's got 2 workers that need to do training. Council B, C and D have also got 1 worker that needs training. All of a sudden, we can put a cohort together. And then the Water Industry Worker Programme also then goes out to market to the RTOs. And there's not many RTOs delivering National Water Package or delivering National Water Package within regional and remote areas. But again, the strength of having that scalability, the strength of having the numbers and the cohort already identified, ready to go. You already know what units of competency they want to do. The RTOs will then come into community and deliver. And the National Water Package in particular is one of these packages that really has to be delivered face to face. It's not something you can just put online. And the other thing that the water operators really value is the opportunity to network, because it gives you an opportunity to phone a friend when things aren't going so well. And you need a bit of technical advice. But it also means that you can actually get trained on the equipment that you are using every day. So even jumping on a plane and heading to Brisbane is not an option. And as I said, with the vacancy rates, there is a challenge there of actually having capacity to release learners for training. Because if you've got no one to backfill them, how can you let them go for training? So it's quite a wicked problem to try and get our own people trained. And that then extends, we are not unique in Queensland. A lot of our regional industries, be it agriculture, and tourism, they also struggle with the same issues that we have. For our sector, the other thing is that the training subsidies, whilst they will fund the delivery of the training package, they don't go far enough to actually fund the RTO's travel out there. They don't go and fund your water operators' time to travel, or the fact they will need overnight accommodation. They may need an internal flight. I mean, some of our QRAP regions are probably 5 or 6 times the size of Tasmania. Yes, you know, you can have a water operator drive to your the next council along, but that could be a 6-hour drive. Could be a bit longer depending on the state of the roads and the time of year. So a lot of challenges with just getting regional workforces trained, upskilled and supported with the professional development that they need. But there is also definitely an issue in terms of then attracting the workers in the first place to work in those regions. What we find is one of the most powerful tools is actually getting people who live in the region to stay in the region. You know, it's where their family ties are. It's a community very often that they are passionate about. So wherever possible, all of the regional councils really try to develop a local workforce and to retain the young people coming up through their community.
You spoke earlier about the Far North Queensland QRAP, and obviously you're dealing with quite a few Aboriginal land and sea councils up there. How are you going about working with those councils and that QRAP to ensure, I suppose, Indigenous representation and training so they can look after their communities?
Yeah. So I should point out the 9 QRAP regions across Queensland, and the 57 participating councils. Now, some of those do include Aboriginal councils, but in the very far north Cape, there isn't actually a QRAP region. It's something of a work in progress at the moment. We would love to develop a 10th QRAP region. And we are in discussions with TICA, which is the Torres Cape Indigenous Council Alliance. So those are the remote and Indigenous and First Nation councils, so the Torres Strait, Cape York, Gulf and FNQ region. Yes, to bring them into the QRAP family, to give them that support in funding, in coordination of identifying projects that they specifically need. So that is a work in progress. But what I would probably like to call out at the moment is there is a program that is delivered through Queensland Health and the Tropical Health Program, and they provide wraparound services for the water operators in those communities. And it's a really strong program. They work within the communities. They coordinate training, both accredited and non-accredited for those communities. They provide networking opportunities for them. And it's very much done, even though Queensland Health is obviously one of our regulators for the urban water sector, it is not done with regulation in mind. It is absolutely done with partnership and support in mind. And that program is absolutely fantastic. They put I think there's around 20 water operators from those communities that are currently undertaking their Cert 3. They make sure that they all have the basic training, a lot of which is on our website. They will help them do those cards on our website. And yes, as I said, it's a great program. It's a program actually I would like to see extended beyond our First Nations communities and also into some of our more remote and regional areas, because we all have the same challenges. Delivering urban water services in remote areas is really difficult.
Absolutely. As we spent a lot of time looking at the past and the present. I want to step into the future. What would you like Queensland Water to achieve in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
Oh, what wouldn't I like to achieve in the next 5 or 10 years? Look, I think the first one and most fundamental one is probably around funding. We are advocating to bring back some form of ongoing, transparent, permanent funding for regional and remote parts of Queensland. The levels of risk that we have now in relation to asset age, issues with, as you said, getting workforce, climate change are just now really quite intolerable. The risk is huge. One of the items that we would like to see something like a community service obligation fee, so a CSO. We already have a CSO in Queensland for delivery of electricity outside SEQ. So if you are in the regions, you will have a CSO that ensures that you are paying the same for electricity as someone in SEQ, and that you can expect the same sort of guaranteed service levels where possible as someone in SEQ. So we are already very adept at using a CSO. I would like to see that investigated for regional and remote urban water services. New South Wales are looking at this and how to design it and what it could look like, which is fabulous. The one thing I would say is we can't wait 5 years in Queensland. We actually need to address that funding issue right now and have a pipeline of works. And that may well mean that the regional and remote councils need to have some form of strategic management or asset plan going forward so we can put those pipelines in. We know every year the level of CSO that each of those communities requires. And actually, a lot of the work that's been done in the QRAP regions is starting to get that evidence base. So it's not a massive leap now to take the evidence base that has been built and is continuing to be built through the QRAP program and designing a CSO that meets risk and has the right level of funding to the right community. Because the one thing that's unique about Queensland is we're all unique. There's no two regions the same. So, a purpose-designed CSO. And a good thing also about a CSO is communities could then borrow against it going forward. And that could be, again, really valuable with communities with very high risk that may need to do or address more work in year 1 and 2, and may not have so much work in 3 and 4. So again, we are getting there. But I realise that money alone isn't going to fix the problem. Throwing money at it, is probably only just going to increase prices for everybody. We will then get a regional tax as well as a Brisbane tax. We are critically short of workers, not just within our sector, but across construction, across consultancy. Here in Queensland, we have this little event in 2032. And a whole range of other developments underway, both industrial, commercial and housing. We've got the fastest growing population in SEQ, but also within some of our regions. So we need to manage those risks and account for that new infrastructure through pricing mechanisms and careful planning. With regards to some of our workforce risk, that it really is a wicked problem. At the moment, the sector overall, not just in Queensland, but the sector, if you do the National Water Package Cert 3, it is only considered to be a traineeship. It is not an apprenticeship. So if I do a Cert 3 in plumbing or a Cert 3 electrotech, I become a plumber, I become an electrician, it's a trade. If I do the Cert 3 in National Water Package, I'm only considered to be a trainee. Now, here in Queensland, for outside SEQ, certainly for councils that work on local government awards, trainees are paid less than apprentices. So that immediately, again, causes us problems when we're looking to attract and retain staff, not just into regions, but into the water sector more generally. So we need to really get to the bottom of some of the training and IR issues that we have in the sector. But those, as I said, are again wicked problems, because if they were easy to fix, we'd have them fixed by now. So, yeah, another issue.
Absolutely. And to finish off, what's the biggest opportunity you see in the water industry right now, and who's leading that change?
Oh, I think there's a whole range of opportunities. We are definitely improving long-term decision making, and we are transforming from, what could be short-term financial fixes to that adaptive long-term planning horizon. And I'm confident that, particularly with some of the strategic reviews we've seen of urban water happen in New Zealand, in New South Wales, more recently in Victoria, be that Victoria has a very different structure to us. But there is definitely a move or a recognition that what we have isn't working. And that is with policymakers and politicians. So that is happening. My concern is that change isn't happening quick enough. So I think really, the sector has to almost be it has to drive its own destiny. One of the things that I am seeing the sector get better at is being bolder. When I first started at Queensland Water, there was a lot of rhetoric around, how the sector is invisible. And to a large part we are, as many services are. As long as people can run a tap, they can flush a toilet, there's not water coming up in the street, we're almost the silent achiever. And this is actually something that I very much take away from the agricultural sector, is that they are masters at lobbying. They are masters at telling their story and their narrative. They're masters at hunting as a pack, as it were. And I really do think that is something that I'm seeing the Queensland water sector become more confident in, particularly as we get the evidence base. We are pushing forward with what we need to see. We are pushing, rather than waiting for government, to respond. At the moment, one of the initiatives is working with our JSC, so our Jobs and Skills Council, to fix the training package, to make it fit for purpose, to try and investigate the route of an apprenticeship and not just a traineeship for our workers, to develop new training products, to work more collectively and share knowledge. So one of the things I'm seeing at the moment with the QREP regions is, once a region finishes a body of work, once it develops new understandings, that QREP region is then sharing that knowledge of work and that body of opportunity with all of the regions. So collectively as a sector, we are really lifting our understanding. We are really lifting the amount of tools and evidence that we have available to us, and resources, collected and collective resources. So yes, the sector is sort of doing it for ourselves. But, we are trying to still advocate and push government to come with us on that journey.
Dr. Davis, thank you very much for your time. And thanks for listening to Inside Water. If you found this conversation valuable, make sure you're following the podcast so you don't miss what's next. We'll be back soon with more insights from across the water industry, because the right upstream decision can help reduce those downstream challenges.